Hello, welcome to Podsongs. I'm Jack Stafford, and I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today, I'm speaking with an academic specialist on international affairs. He's a professor at the US Naval War College and at the Harvard Extension School. His work deals with international affairs. But we're not going to talk about any of that today. We're talking about the death of expertise and how we all think we know everything. Please welcome Tom Nichols. Hello.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, for some reason it wasn't picking up my Yeti here, my microphone, so...
No worries. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat.
Well, thanks for asking.
So the idea of the show is, just to refresh, that I write a song inspired by our conversation. And
I didn't know quite what to suggest there. It's such an odd, my book is such an odd subject, so I'm going to leave that to your creativity.
well, the death of expertise.
Yeah, it's why it's not just the death of expertise. It's why do we think we know better than the people who know stuff?
Yeah.
It's like people who walk up to you and say, "Oh, you're a songwriter? I have some ideas for you. Here's a tune I've had in my head. This would be a hit. This is a snappy song." I was on Bill Maher's show and we were talking about it. I said, it's like people walking up to you and saying, "Bill, you're a comic. I have some tips for you on timing." And Maher said, that happens. People walk up to me even now. Like, the guy's been on TV for 30 years and, a stand-up comedian most of his life. People walk up to him and say, "I have some tips for you on timing." And so I wrote a whole book about why do people do that? Why do people think that's okay? So I don't know if that provides any inspiration, but that's what led me to write about it.
I guess that's something that pisses off a lot of people. But so why were you the one that inspired to write a book about it?
I wasn't. The death of expertise is a phrase that's been kicking around for a while, and I was actually at a wedding, and there were a group of experts. We were all friends of the groom, and we were all guys that did foreign policy and stuff like that. And we were talking about this death of expertise problem, and why does that happen? And I kind of filed that away in my head, and then one day I was on Twitter, and this actually had happened a few times around this time. This was about 2012, 2013. And it happened in real life and on social media because there were a lot of young people who were very entranced at the time with Edward Snowden. And one of them said to me, again, this happened during a real lecture and happened online. She said, I said, "This isn't how Russia works." I said, "You're going to find out that Snowden's jungled up with the Russians. You can't just get on an airplane and go to Russia. I've been to Russia a couple dozen times. It doesn't work that way. I'm an expert on Russia. I speak Russian. I've been doing this for 30 years, And a couple of times people said, "Tom, I don't think you understand what you're saying about Russia. Let me try to tell you what happened. Let me explain to you what's going on here." And one night that happened for the umpteenth time on social media. And I sat down. I had a blog in those days, which I took down because I think blogs are part of the problem. I don't think people should blog anymore. I really don't. I just think, blogs have convinced us all that all of our thoughts matter and are very important, and then we have to share them with the world. I don't do anything. I don't have a Substack. I know I'm detouring here for a minute. I was asked early on if I wanted to join Substack, and I said, I don't work without editors. I just think it's important to have an editor looking over my shoulder. And anyway, I sat down on my blog and I banged out this 3,000 word angry screed about, I'm a classic, raging old man on his line, you kids today. And, but I said, this has been happening to me for a good part of my career because I have a pretty esoteric area of expertise. I've written a book about nuclear weapons. nuclear strategy, Soviet-American relations, Russia, NATO stuff. It's like, it's not the kind of thing that you walk into a bar and somebody says, hey, I was thinking about NATO's theater nuclear deterrent the other day. I mean, it's kind of a narrow field. And yet for years we've said, oh yeah, nuclear weapons. I have thoughts. I have some thoughts for you. And I find, and I would try and be polite and say, okay, please, feel free to go ahead. And finally, I just gave up. I said, no, we have to think about why this is happening. And the more I looked into it, I wrote the piece. Anyway, so I write this piece and it goes viral. It gets picked up by a magazine and then it goes kind of viral. And people start sending me letters. I still remember I got one from, I'm a molecular biologist in France. Can I translate your article and post it in my lab? And I said, you are more than welcome, there's to use the article free of charge. I said, but are you telling me that you're a molecular biologist and people argue with you? And he said, oh yeah, all the time. Doctors became a huge constituent. My own doctor, he's now retired. I miss him. He was an experienced old doctor, and he said, oh yeah, he says, people don't walk in and say, I have questions. They walk in and say, here's what I have and here's what you're going to do. I gave a talk after I wrote the book. A pediatric surgeon in the Midwest said people came to him with their daughter and said, here's the procedure for which we are engaging you. Like you were hiring a stonemason, or a carpenter to put up your bookshelves. And he said, I don't think that's a good procedure for this child. I wouldn't recommend doing that. They said, no, we're not asking you. We're not asking you for a recommendation. This is what we've decided. And he said, I'm not doing it. And they got very angry with him and they took the child to another doctor and the child was gravely injured. So anyway, when you say, why did you write the book? I was not going to. I wrote this as a kind of cri de coeur, and then when I had to work with an editor, I slimmed it down and wrote it as an article. And then Oxford University Press called me up and said, this would really make a good book. And you can ask my editor, Dave McBride at Oxford. He said, this would make a really good book. And my first reaction was, really? I said, do you think somebody wants to listen to me bitch for 250 pages about, And he said, yeah, I think you're onto something here, and like good editors do, he helped shape it into something that was more than just me bitching for 250 pages. But that was my first reaction, you should write a book about this. And I said, no, I don't think I should write a book about this. I always like to brag a little bit at this point and say that I was surprised. I thought I was mostly writing about Americans. The book is now in 13 languages, which is nice for me as an author, but it's terrifying to think of that. It's terrifying to think, is this a problem? It's in Chinese, it's in Russian, it's in Korean, it's in Turkish and Finnish and Indonesian. Is this really that widespread a problem? And apparently it is. So that bothers me. Like I said, it's nice to find out that your book's being sold all over the world, but it's really scary to think that something you thought was kind of, again, kind of grumpy old American on his lawn yelling at kids has turned into something that a lot of people think is a real problem.
Yeah. Because you write in the book, because I think people have always been like this, no? But you write in the book that the internet is accelerating all of this and people Google everything. But do they also can they cherry pick their experts? Because they say this expert does say this and this expert, right. I'm thinking of the pandemic, for example.
Well, I'm gonna back up and take issue with you and say, when you said hasn't it always been like this? No, it has always been the case that people are suspicious of experts because it's and experts, I think, have always understood this. It's a very disempowering relationship to be in a discussion with an expert, right? it's, maybe for a musician, it's like the first time a young, inexperienced musician walks into the studio with an experienced producer, and the producer says, here's stuff we're going to do. And the kid says, well, I was playing bars yesterday. I don't know about any of this stuff, the equivalent, I think, for that most people have experienced people from every walk of life have experiences when they're ill, and the doctor says, I have this unique knowledge, and here's a bunch of stuff that you don't understand that I'm going to try and explain to you. It's very scary. It's very disempowering. So it has always been the case that people don't like eggheads. They don't like pointy-headed intellectuals. They don't like hearing bad news from their doctor. They don't, that's normal. What isn't normal, and the reason I wrote the book, is the new phenomenon of people saying, not only do I not trust experts, or, not only do I want a second and third, fourth opinion, I am smarter than experts. That is the narcissistic streak that has become stronger, I think, even before the internet, since before the I think this goes back to the early 1970s, and the me decade, and personal empowerment and self-actualization and all that therapeutic stuff. Where instead of people saying, look, I have the right to ask questions. I'm an informed consumer. If my doctor says I have to take this pill, I want to know what are the side effects? What does this pill do? How long will I have to take it? Those are all great questions. It's when people walk in and say, oh, I did some reading and I know about pharmacology. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that really changed. That's the thing where, on a more prosaic level, I had a house fire here, and in the old days, I think people would say to the person fixing their house, now, what are you doing there? And how much is it going to cost me? And is this the best work you can do? Now and I was talking to the guys, this was a couple of years ago, I was talking to the guys who were fixing this place, and they say, oh yeah, people walk up and they say, so what kind of wiring are you using there? God, well, and of course you could say, what am I using? I'm using 30 gauge, spaghetti pasta. I'm using ziti. I'm rewiring your house with licorice whips. The average person does not know the difference, but they have to feel empowered. They have to feel like they're involved and they're in control and they have something to offer, and they're telling this to the expert fixing their house. I had this discussion with one of the guys that was painting my house, and he said, "No, okay, we've got the 16 different kinds of." I said, "Jim, what's the paint that makes my house not smell like smoke? You know that stuff, right?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "You trusting me with this?" I said, "I wouldn't." I said, "You could tell me these cans of paint. You could show me a can of mayonnaise and tell me it's paint, and I'm not going to really know." So yes, as the expert, I'm trusting you in this. And he said, "What a relief!" Basically, that he said, "I'll fix this. I'll make this right." And I think people won't do that anymore because they are mistrustful of each other. They are narcissistic in the extreme. And they have too much time on their hands.
Has there been a sitcom character that embodies this personality, would you say, if you've seen one?
Yeah. In the book, actually, I mentioned, I don't know if this was big in Britain, but the classic American television show Cheers from the 1980s about a bar in Boston. And there was a guy, and he talked like I'm from Massachusetts, so I have this accent down. He's a mailman, and he was the bar know-it-all. And no matter what anybody said, say, well, studies at Johns Hopkins have shown that that thing is, and he would then say something completely ridiculous. He had no idea what he was talking about, but he felt the need to always be smarter than everybody. There was even an episode of the show where someone finally just told him to shut up or he was going to punch him out. But there, as I say in the book, we've all become that guy. And in part enabled by the universality of education now. It used to be you could settle a lot of arguments in a bar by saying, well, wait a minute, I went to college. now everybody in the bar, well, we all went to college. We all went to universities, which I know in Britain you say I go to university. Here in the United States, it used to be college was a local thing. Universities were big research institutions. But now every local, school has rebranded itself as a university. People say, oh, I'm a university graduate. And then when worse comes to worse and push comes to shove, we all pull this out and say, well, as it says here, studies have shown, and of course, we don't know what we're looking at. We're not equipped to make those judgments. We don't know how to disaggregate the sources or check their provenance, but we do it because it feels good. It's empowering. It feels, it makes us feel like we're in charge of things again for just a moment, instead of at the mercy of a big, unpredictable world.
But what do you do when you get competing experts who maybe are interested in their number of Twitter followers, and then, they out-compete each other, and there's conflicting research about things? What about that?
Absolutely. There's a couple of problems on experts. There is a section in the book where I talk about experts kind of brought this on themselves, in part by their own violations of their expertise. We now live in a time where, and I'm guilty of it. I do a lot of television in America. It's very hard, although I have done this and I've tried to be better, but it's very hard when a television producer calls you up and says, hey, can you come on and talk about subject X? And you say, I don't know anything about that subject. And this actually happened. A producer said to me, come on, it's 5 minutes. And I said, it's fine. I said, I am not intelligent enough on this subject to talk about it for 5 minutes. And there was this kind of long silence she said, I really appreciate how honest you are. So no one ever says that. But I've gotten into trouble, in public saying, well, as an expert on nuclear weapons, let me tell you about, what I think about healthcare policy. I mean, I've made that mistake. I also think experts and the public have gotten into a very dangerous synergy where the public likes to play gotcha when experts are wrong. And experts are going to be wrong now and then. We're human beings. We're going to design aircraft engines that catch fire now and then. We're going to, leave a scalpel inside of a patient now and then. It's going to happen. But that means that experts tend to be very paranoid about covering up their mistakes and saying, oh, it didn't really happen. We're fine. But the problem you raise is really interesting about what happens when experts disagree. When experts would tell you that experts disagreeing with each other is called science. That's how we learn stuff. That's why we submit things for peer review. That's why when the book that we're talking about now was written for Oxford University Press, and they sent it out at the beginning and the end to a bunch of academics who are not known to me. I mean, I know who they are now because a couple came forward and say, I was a guy who reviewed your book, but anonymously said, thumbs up, thumbs down, things we think are good, things we think are bad. Experts disagreeing with each other is how it's supposed to happen. And the public should ask, what are the issues at play here, and what are we being asked to decide as voters? An example, the pandemic. Do masks matter, yes or no? Well, at first the experts said, well, we think this is droplets on surfaces, so wash your hands. They didn't want to create a panic about masks because they weren't sure how many they had, and they want to make sure nobody was making a run on medical masks that were needed for hospitals. But over time, the experts developed a consensus. Wearing masks is not a bad thing, right? It can only help you. We only disagree about how much it helps you. And instead, the public said, yeah, but you told us something early on and you weren't quite sure. And now I don't have to listen to you at all. Mm-hmm. And that's where it becomes a problem. A similar example before the pandemic was about eggs. Now, I happen to like eggs, and I brought this up with my doctor because I was pissed, where they said, don't eat eggs. It turns out eggs are great for you. They're little protein pills. Turns out we can't really metabolize the cholesterol in them. And I said to my doctor, dude, and he went, yeah, we screwed that one up. But that doesn't mean, as someone said to me when I was giving a talk about this, someone said, well, I think this just proves doctors never really understood heart disease at all. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Just because doctors were wrong, and by the way, the people who figured out that doctors were wrong about eggs were other doctors doing studies based on studies by doctors. It wasn't some guy, two guys like us on the internet saying, I think eggs are probably good for you there, And so it doesn't mean that because doctors were wrong about eggs, that you should roll out of bed and eat a cheeseburger and drink a 6-pack for breakfast. Doctors are right about most things. And as I tell people when it comes to these expert disagreements, the experts are not always right. They are just more likely to be right than you are. And everyone can be an expert in their own area, If a nuclear physicist walked in here right now and said, Jack, I'm going to explain to you how to write a song, I think the right answer would be, why don't you have a seat? This isn't your thing. But we there's a great word that the author Richard Hofstadter used. It's that we have to have a belief in our own omnicompetence.
Okay,
which is a great word. But, the average person says, I'm just competent at everything. And that's demonstrably false. We're competent in very few things.
Did I read in my research that you were a 5-time champion of Jeopardy?
Yes, I am back in the days when that was considered undefeated, when they retired you after 5.
Wow.
But, it's interesting. It's funny you bring that up because in America, that's a cultural signifier of, well, you must be just generally smart.
Yeah.
No, it means I have a good memory for a lot of bits of unrelated data.
So you are an expert in the bar before Google. You could have been that guy.
Yeah, well, only if settling bar bets about trivia, yeah. But not about, studies showing eggs, yada, yada. I always say that the people that are good at Jeopardy are people who just have very sticky memories about things. All of us have learned, if 99% of the questions on Jeopardy, if you don't panic, and you look at them for a second, you realize that you probably learned the answer to them somewhere in high school. Because Jeopardy buries the I was watching last night, funny you should say this, and they bury the answer right in the question. They said something like, these authors made and it was a very complicated question. It said that centered on the adventures of, in a children's book about a monkey. And that a Jeopardy player knows. Forget all the other stuff. How many children's books about monkeys are there? Who's the most famous monkey in a children's book? Well, if you grew up with Curious George, it just wasn't. If you could just strain out all the other stuff, children's book about a monkey. Well, there can be only one, and you knew that from the time you were 6. So it's mostly just kind of a. Jeopardy is almost a stunt in some ways. And yet Americans, to go back to my point, Americans say, yeah, I know you worked in the US Senate, and I know you have a PhD, and you wrote a bunch of books. This actually happened to me. I was a young professor when I was on Jeopardy. One of my students walked up to me and he said, Professor Nichols, I saw you on Jeopardy last night. He said, this was about 38 years ago when I was on. He said, what am I saying? 38 years ago, 28 years ago. Sorry, I'm dating myself. It was almost 30 years ago. And he said, Professor Nichols, I saw you on Jeopardy. I had no idea you were so smart. And I said, Billy, you didn't think maybe the doctorate or the Ivy League teaching job or the books that he said, yeah, but you know what I mean. And what he meant was smart in a way that I can relate to, right, that I think counts as smart. And I just said, oh, you're killing me. I felt like it was a knife in my chest. I was like, kid, you're killing me here. But imagine that. You've spent your whole life becoming educated, becoming a college professor, doing all this research, and your student walks up, sees you answer trivia for 28 minutes on a television show. He said, I had no idea you were so smart.
But I heard some of your students on the first day of college come up to you and suggest maybe some course books you should include in the...
almost every year it will happen that there's always one or two students will say, are we going to cover subject X in this course? And I say, well, we're going to cover what's in the syllabus that I wrote that's in your hands. And they say, yeah, I saw that, but it'd be really cool if we did this. I'm like, it's the first day of class. Maybe you should begin from the assumption that I actually know what I'm doing and that I have worked this out with, the Naval War College. I don't speak for the Naval War College. I always have to point that out. That maybe I have worked this out with the Naval War College or Harvard or LaSalle or Georgetown or wherever I'm teaching. Maybe a group of adults who do this as a profession have figured this out ahead of time. And it is really astonishing. I've had students over the years say, I don't think you understand this subject. Like literally 2 or 3, I don't think you understand this subject. I read a book on it that was different from this. And I used to argue with that. And now I've said, if you think that wherever it is, Harvard or, the Navy or whoever, that if you think they didn't know what they were doing, hiring me and approving this curriculum, then I wouldn't, then you should take your money and go elsewhere because this is a bad idea. But it is remarkable that I've been teaching for about 35 years and it has accelerated. Like that would have been a story in the faculty lounge 30 years ago. Now it's, Tuesday. And just, I think, it's the impact. I think also this is where the internet, and I don't mean to go on about this, but it's also where the existence of the internet and things like email change the dynamics of teaching. Because when I was a kid, to go to your professor's office, you usually had to have a question that mattered. Like you didn't just walk in and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Having coffee. Now it is not unusual at all for students to zap you an email at 2:00 in the morning and say, "So, have you considered X, Y, and Z?" and finish it with thoughts. Like, oh, okay, well, I wasn't doing anything either. So, and I think that kind of casualness, on the one hand, I'm glad kind of breaks down some of the walls. It makes it more easy for introverted students to reach out and have a record of what we're talking about. But it also leads to a kind of sloppiness and casualness of thought that, and again, it feeds that narcissism of, I had a thought about the syllabus and I don't think it's as good as you think it is. I think if you had to do that in person, if you had to walk down to the, Department of History or Department of math or wherever it is, and sit down in your professor's office and say, "I'm here because I don't think you really understand your own subject," it would be a different dynamic. I think most students wouldn't want to do that. But when you're sitting there at 2 a.m, and you're watching TV and you've had a beer and you say, "Look at this. So I don't know if this guy really, you sort of pick up, you're really that smart," instead. And I think it causes problems.
I'd like to see one of these students get on an airplane and then they go into the cockpit and say, I know you've got a flight plan, but I just came up with this at home. Maybe you want to use this, instead.
I used to think that's a joke, and you should talk to I interviewed people in every walk of life over the course. This book took me about 2 years to write, 2.5 years of research, and I heard stories that I just couldn't believe were true. People saying to surgeons, here's the procedure I think you should choose. Wow.
So now they're anesthetizing patients not to stop them feeling pain, but just to shut them up.
Hey, I have some recommendations. Yeah, count backward.
You have to do it. I think a HBO series is, this. I'm thinking Larry David meets Cheers.
Well, the thing is, it would have to be a very dark comedy because so often these things go wrong. Talk to the lawyers who say things like, what you're, I recommend you take this plea bargain or you will go to jail. And the client says, you just lawyer, and the guy ends up in jail. I mean, the lawyers tell me, he says, I've had clients tell me how to defend them in court, and, okay, that's the plea you want to make.
But can you blame Americans?
I went to law school, but we'll take a shot,
I mean, you're Americans, though. You have your president telling you to, maybe, I don't know, try this, try injecting yourself with a...
Trump was the apotheosis of this, but I like to think I'm second to no one in my anti-Trumpism, but I will also say he caught this wave and surfed it. He did not create it. He figured out how to exploit it, but it was there before him. I mean, a lot of people thought when I wrote The Death of Expertise that I was, writing this kind of long subtweet or trolling of the Trumpers and the president. But the blog post I wrote was in 2013. The first article about it came out in 2014, and the contract was signed for the book in like early 2015. It had nothing to do with Trump. And as I told people, I didn't know Trump was going to happen. I just knew that something like Trump was going to happen. That was what I could see coming. And when Trump came out and said, what do I need advisors? Do I need a foreign policy advisor? Wouldn't I be better off without one? And I think we've answered all those questions now. By the way, I quoted Michael Gove on, in your country about having enough of experts, and Mr. Gove was rather upset that I quoted him incompletely. So in the next version of the book, I don't think the full quote makes it any better, but it's the same. It's the same notion that you have these very educated elites saying, the experts are really very stupid. Just listen to us and we'll take care of you. Trump, I think the Brexit folks, really pushed that and made it work for them. Mm-hmm. But it happened everywhere. Italy, with the collapse of the Italian government for a while into this kind of populist madness. The United States, Poland, Hungary, you see India. This is people, I think, feeling disempowered, and that's colliding with. I mean, there's reasons to feel disempowered in the modern world. We live in a really fast-moving, complicated world. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there have been political entrepreneurs who've been very good at saying, "I will make all of this simple for you."
Right.
And people love that. Instead of saying the world is complicated, we do things by the division of labor. That's what I keep arguing to people. Accept the division of labor. We don't build our own houses. We hire, a guy who does windows. There's a guy who does heating. There's a guy who does plumbing. We don't just hire one guy who says, I can, this isn't like 1810 where you get an axe and you build your own house. No one does that. And no one should. But people find it very insulting when I say things like, you are not equipped to understand this subject. People say, why are you calling me stupid? I'm not calling you stupid. It's like me, again, with my house being repaired, where the guy said, the electrician, he said, I'm gonna put this thing here, and it's gonna be a general, I can't remember what it's called, GFP, fault protection thing. And I went, I didn't understand a word. I said, words, power, right?
Yeah.
And he went, and he laughed. And I said, why is this? He said, this is safer than what you had. I said, great. Safer than what I had. Is it state of the art and to code? And he said, yes. I said, terrific. I don't need to understand the theory of electrical, and he just kind of went, oh, okay. Because I said, I am not capable of comprehending this. I can nod and pretend that I am.
So when people criticize it,
I think it makes life easier if we just say, look, words, yeah. Hot water. I get it.
So the people that don't like being told that, they think it's like some sort of like Indian caste system or some form of oppression. Or...
Yeah. Yes, they think it's oppression. They think it's oppression. And, as a doctor, as a surgeon once said to me, he said, when people get mad about that, I want to just take all the instruments and medications, put them on a tray, push it across the table, and say, "Fine, you do it." If you're that insulted, then here you go. Take out your own spleen. And again, I'm not arguing. I think a lot of people watching this might say, well, he's just telling us to treat experts like gods and just accept what they say. No. Mm-hmm. It's your right to ask, why are you taking out my spleen? What are you going to do? Where are you going to cut me? And if you don't like the answers, go to another expert. Mm-hmm. Go to another doctor. Get a second opinion. Hey, I have this problem. When a family member was going through a battle with cancer, we had, a local oncologist who said, this is what we think, this is what I recommend. And we said, okay, but we're going to go up to the Dana-Farber Institute. We're going to ask some people there. Okay. They took the file. This doctor sat down, looked at it and said, yeah, I think generally whoever this doctor is, has about right. Here are some other things to consider. We walked down the hall. We talked to some other people. I mean, it's okay to do that. It's not okay to say, you're an oncologist. I have some thoughts on cancer I'm going to share with you. Here's what I think about cancer. Because you're not... I said that at a talk one time, and a guy in the audience said, well, why do I need to do that when all of the issues of the Lancet are online, or the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine? And I said, are you a doctor? And he said, no. And I said, then it wasn't written for you. You're not capable of taking in that. That's like me saying I can build a house because I am a loyal subscriber to Architectural Digest. I am not equipped to do that. And he got really, once again, I said, I'm not trying to insult you here. I said, these are articles written by experts for experts who have a background. And that means that professionally, these include a certain amount of shorthand and assumptions about things you already know because you learned them in medical school or because you're in that particular specialization. I said, you as a layperson cannot simply download the Lancet and say, okay, fine, I'm up to speed. You cannot do it. And the sooner you accept that, the better off everyone is. And he was not, he just, You're part of the elite conspiracy to keep us all stupid and uninformed and blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay. Well.
Because you're quite a niche area of expertise. I can't have you on the show without talking something nuclear, some foreign expert of foreign policy. So how is that? You said Trump ignored everyone.
Trump, or as Trump referred to it, the nuclear. Like your grandpa who doesn't understand the hashtagging. Nuclear weapons are a particularly interesting area of expertise because we've never, other than using them against Japan, we don't have a whole body of knowledge to draw on. We don't have veterans, as someone once said. There's a great line where someone said to a general said to a civilian, how many nuclear wars have you fought, Professor? And the guy said, the same number you have, General, which is 0. On the other hand, there's a whole body of knowledge about nuclear crises, how nuclear weapons work, what the specifications of these systems are, how political arrangements have evolved to deal with them, what we know from looking inside other nations during moments of deliberation about nuclear weapons. It is a field of expertise unto itself. And, the notion that said, well, since no one's ever fought a nuclear war and we're all human beings, we're all experts on nuclear weapons. It's simply not true. I mean, and again, I hope that your listeners, your viewers will understand how staggeringly narcissistic all of that is. For people who say, well, I know about that stuff. the wisest people are the ones who are willing to step back and say, I don't know anything about this. And that doesn't mean I trust everybody about it, but I'm going to, when I give advice to lay people about how to deal with experts, I said, look, ask what their credentials are, ask where they work, ask what their work product looks like, ask about their years of experience in their business. Do you remember the movie Castaway?
Tom Hanks.
With Tom Hanks.
Yep.
He's stuck on a desert island and his tooth is rotting. And finally, it's so painful, he has to knock out his own tooth with an ice skate. I think Mary just sort of says, and he kind of knocks his own tooth out. And I always tell people, there are bad dentists in the world. There are good dentists and there are bad dentists. But at that moment, you will take the worst dentist in the world as an expert over you. No one stuck there would say, I heard this dentist isn't the greatest dentist in the world, so I'm going to knock my own tooth out with an ice skate and a rock. And I think, people need to get over that insane narcissism about this, to say, ask about the background of an expert, and also ask questions. Experts love to answer questions. It's when you walk up to us and say, you're an expert? Okay, let me tell you something. That's very American, right? There's that great Monty Python scene, you Americans, right? And the meaning of life, you Americans always, let me tell you, and I gotta say. But the world is becoming more Americanized like that. If you think about how often we begin, and I'm trying to do it less, if you think about how often we begin statements with words like, look, or listen, or look, or let me tell you, or let me explain, or I gotta say, if you're talking to an expert, start with, I have a question for you. That, I think, is a much more effective way. And I think for experts, my advice to them is always to remember there was a time when you didn't know it. The worst teacher I ever had was in high school. And I won't mention her name because she's dead. God rest her soul. I'm sure she meant well. But she was a terrible teacher because it was very clear to me that there was never a time in her life that she could remember where she didn't know and understand trigonometry. Like, she just, for her, understanding sines and cosines, there was just never a time she could imagine that she didn't know this stuff. And so when someone would say, I don't get this, she would look at them like, God, what an idiot. Like, I knew this in the birth canal, So I think for experts, that's always a danger, to say, this person is asking me something so elementary and stupid. No, it's okay to say, all right, but it's when I think there has to be an element of trust involved. And maybe that's, where I want to leave that part of the discussion. That if you ask me a question, you're going to have to trust that I at least know what I'm talking about. Now, you don't have to think I'm completely right, and maybe you want to ask somebody else about it. But if I don't have the time to start with you if we're talking about nuclear weapons, I don't have the time to start with you in 1945 and work you through the decision to bomb Hiroshima and the creation of the first U.S. bomber force and the development of massive retaliation. And, I teach it takes me 12 weeks to do that in a course.
It's an expensive course.
Well, it's not that expensive, but it's not cheap.
I'm not going to disseminate that information for free.
Yeah, right. But I mean, also it takes time.
Yeah.
And so when someone says, well, I'm going to disagree with you, I'm like, look, I don't have the time to start from day one. You're going to have to trust that I actually know some of this stuff, and you're going to have to kind of take it as a given. And I think, again, people say, well, we're peers. No, this is another thing that makes people really angry. We are not peers. We're friends. We are colleagues. We are co-citizens. We are fellow human beings. But on most things, we are not peers. When it comes to carpentry, the guy who rebuilt my floors, I'm not his peer. I'm the guy that should shut up and get out of the way. That actually happened. I was standing there and they were talking. Finally, one of them just took me by the shoulder and said, Mr. Nichols, this chimney could collapse on you and I need to move. I said, everybody would be better off if I just left. And they went, well, it would be one less person to worry about. And I said, okay. Big decisions, call me. Little decisions, I don't need to be involved.
So you think you're better?
It's very humbling.
So after writing this
book, very humbling thing. Sorry?
So you think after writing this book, you're much more willing to give in to other experts like you've.
Yeah. It reminded me, I have become both more arrogant and more humble at the same time. When it comes to the stuff I know, I am much more about planting the flag. I don't think the therapeutic model of education has served us well. By the therapeutic model, I mean and I say this in the book, we ask students, are you happy? Do you feel involved? Or do you feel affirmed? That's great. But in the end, we still have to teach you stuff. So when someone says, I think the world is flat. We used to say, if you're trained as kind of in the classical Western teaching model, you'd say, okay, let's unpack that together. Let's work on this together. I hear you, but let me try to explain to you and get you to understanding why the world could be spherical. And that's the blah, blah, blah. My attitude now is, no, you're wrong. We're going to save a lot of time. The world's not flat. This guy's an astrophysicist. You're not. Take it as written. The world's round.
Is it?
Now, what else did you want to know? But we're not going to argue about that. So in that, I've become more insufferable and arrogant about that kind of stuff. But I have become more humble about just understanding that I don't need to control. I think my house catching fire really taught me that how little I can control in a complicated situation where there were firemen and inspectors and electrical guys. And, I went to all these meetings. It was like a quarter of my house got gutted. Thank God, as you can see, it all turned out beautifully. But, I was sitting in these meetings and these guys were talking about lengths of pipe and, joists and drywall and paint. And I just said, if you need a big decision on a yes or no, do you still want to have a fireplace? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Do you want this size fireplace or that I could handle that. I didn't need to know about, how much bricking it was going to take I just did, that's what stonemasons are for. If they have to ask me that, they're not doing their job.
Because education by definition must be disruptive though, because you have to change something to get the information in there.
I don't know if I buy that. Education is cumulative. Think of it as coats of paint or layers of sediment that create a sedimentary rock that it's just, you gain more and more and more. That's why college takes 4 years, because you're not the same. You should not be the same person after 4 years of college that you were when you walked in as a freshman. Unfortunately, many people are leaving college untouched by the experience. But I don't think it has to be disruptive. And I don't think, I think, again, people cast themselves in a very heroic mode of, I'm breaking paradigms. It's okay to just learn stuff. It's okay to be smarter about something tomorrow than you were yesterday. The conventional wisdom, I think one of the things that's happened over the years is we've come to believe that the conventional wisdom is always wrong. And my answer is, it's the conventional wisdom, usually because it's been tested enough times to become the conventional wisdom. There aren't that many. I think it's always interesting when the conventional wisdom is proven wrong, but it shows you how unusual it is that it becomes a thing in itself, that we talk about the moments when we don't talk about all the things every day. We're saying, the conventional wisdom turned out to be right. Because the conventional wisdom turns out to be right most days.
Yeah.
And it's not your job to see if you can break paradigms every day. Most people are not that, try to get through the day without hurting anybody and, doing your own job well and seeing to your own affairs. And you're ahead of the game at that point, I think. Make sure that you're, what's that great article about a commencement speech? What's my advice for the future? Wear sunblock. You might change the world, but in the meantime, wear sunblock.
Yeah.
Probably going to be better for you.
So you're writing another book at the moment, is that right?
Yeah. I'm writing a book. I just finished it. It's in production. It'll be out in July. It's called Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. And it does extend some of these themes from the death of expertise, particularly this problem of narcissism and entitlement. We have fallen into this idea that liberal democracy is in trouble because the elites are screwing us over and globalization has destroyed our way of life. The reality is we've never lived in a more, and people hate this because, again, they think they know better. They think they know the real facts. Even the poorest human beings have never lived in a better and more prosperous and more peaceful time in human history. That's just a fact. It's not even arguable. Just before he stepped down, Barack Obama came to Europe and he gave a whole talk to this group of young Europeans. I mentioned it in the book. And he says, I know you don't believe it, but if you could choose any time in human history to be born, it would be now. And of course, kids are especially part of the reason I wrote this book, again, comes from years of interacting with younger people who say to me, Professor, you don't understand. These are the worst times ever. And they say, maybe not worse than, World War II or the Great Depression. I would say, these aren't even the worst times in my adult memory. Like the 1970s were worse than this. And they look at me and they say, that can't be true. It's not true. And I think we have fallen into catastrophizing everything. And that undermines democracy, because if you think the world is always falling apart, you say, the answer is my system of government doesn't work. Yeah. Democracy is broken. My hometown, a steel mill closed in my hometown 50 years ago. So democracy is broken. I have a college degree in, creative writing, and I'm not employed as a writer. So democracy is broken. We keep coming back to these explanations that democracy is broken. Here in the United States, we keep talking about, forever wars. We've been at war forever. No, the U.S. military has been repeatedly deployed for limited engagements in parts of the world that you can't find on a map. You, average citizen, have not been at war ever. And but it's like, no, everything is bad. The economy has never been this awful. Now, I was in a debate at Cambridge, the Cambridge Union, virtually because of COVID. And afterward, one of the other debaters said, well, you're too Pollyannish. There's huge amounts of income inequality. Well, that's all true. Rich people are far richer than you and I are now. That is not the same thing as rich people getting richer and poor people getting poorer. That's some people getting richer a lot faster than other people. And that's a problem, but that's not the end of democracy. We can solve all these problems tomorrow if we all just showed up and vote. But we also don't want to disrupt our lives. Americans, I won't speak, for our British viewers, but Americans, for example, complain endlessly about China and then buy tons of cheap Chinese manufacturing. We're addicted to it and we blame somebody else for it. The Americans who type on their phone, I hate these Chinese manufacturers. Well, if you want to pay $2,000 or $3,000 for an iPhone, we can fix that, but you won't. If you complain about the ease with which the government deploys military forces to Niger or to Afghanistan, well, then we could have a draft and have a citizen army that we'd be a lot more reluctant to use. Oh no, wait a minute, I don't care about it that much. So I think we have become. I don't want to use. I guess I use the word decadent, but I think this narcissism has led to a kind of decadence that leads us to say that whenever we are inconvenienced or unhappy, democracy has failed. And in this new book, I think I refute that pretty well.
That's great.
I'll leave that for readers to decide whether I've refuted it well.
And
as a musician, I will tell you that it's full of pop music references, because sorry, I keep moving around here. I left my camera out of focus. One of the things I point out is that American and British pop music for 50 years has been full of songs about how terrible the economy is and how everything's ending. Even when times are good, people say, well, it wasn't like this when you were a kid. I'm like, I don't know. When I was a kid, Bruce Springsteen was singing about darkness on the edge of town and factories and, hometowns going under and the boarded up stores. I said, how many times can you kill the same town in the same song? John Cougar Mellencamp writing about the deserted farms in 1985, 35 years ago. And I think we have convinced we're like hypochondriacs now who just say, I'm sick. I'm always sick. No matter, even when I feel good, I feel bad. I know I have cancer. I know I'm dying. And it's your fault. And I think it's that is going to kill us faster than Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin or anything else. And if we don't stop, we're going to rot out our own system of governments by our own hand. I hate to leave you on such a bummer.
Yeah, no, but you're
sorry.
It's been a blast of common sense, and it's been great, Tom.
Well, thanks for having me, Jack. It's been fun.
And you want it in a Boston style music, is that right?
I can never escape this. I do not like Led Zeppelin. And I once said that I would rather listen to the first side of the first Boston album forever than ever listen to any Led Zeppelin. Okay. So I stand by that. I don't like Led Zeppelin. I think the first side.
Okay.
The first side of the first Boston album is one of the most perfect album sides ever made.
All right.
Is Boston a better band than Zeppelin? No. Okay, fine. They might be better musicians. Led Zeppelin might be, but I don't like their music. It's like saying I don't like Indian food, right? I said that one time. I took hell about that. I'd rather eat in a diner than eat Indian food. Well, that's just who I am.
All right. No Led Zeppelin. I get it. I won't try any.
No Led Zeppelin. No.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
And if you're on an airplane, put your shoes on.
Okay.
That's my other crusade over the years. Stop taking your shoes off on airplanes.
All right.
It's disgusting.
Well, I think we could keep this going for a long time, but it's been great, Tom, and I've got to get to work on a song.
Having strong opinions is not the same as knowing things. Experts are more likely to be right. Now we're all Google-fueled and wiki-fed, conspiracies easily led. Our feelings matter more to us than facts. And experts say unanimously, it's the death of expertise. Democracy's in jeopardy. We're our own worst enemy. The death of expertise. Ignorance was made a virtue by social entrepreneurs who confuse obscurantism with humility. But now we're all omnicompetent and demanding our entitlement. Our society could quickly cease to function. Experts say unanimously, it's the death of expertise. Democracy's in jeopardy. We're our own worst enemy. The death of expertise. doesn't mean that all opinions are right, and disagreeing's not insulting. Saying you're wrong's not saying you're stupid. It's not elitist or undemocratic to say that professionals know more about their work than you do. Experts say unanimously it's the death of expertise. Democracy's in jeopardy. We're our own worst enemy. The death of expertise.
Well, hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. The next time somebody's going on being a know-it-all, I can really set them straight. Please rate and review on your podcast app. Like the song on Spotify, Deezer, iTunes. Share it. Do everything you can to help promote the show. It really does help. Thanks to my musicians, Mauricio Sanicola and Massimino Vozza, and you, the listener, and my researcher, Tori Verbo, without whom I could not do the show. Thanks again. See you next time.